What's up guys, also Footballtalk here. And then there were 8. The Wildcard Round included a couple of real thrillers that came down to the final play, or plays that didn't actually happen, while we saw some contenders separate from the pretenders, particularly in the 2 vs 7 matchups, and I actually am a perfect 6-0 from my bracket that I filled out. Now we move on to the quarterfinals, so to speak, and what I think is the best weekend in all football, which once again is loaded with intriguing matchups. We got the AFC and NFC games mixed, with the Bengals at Titans and 49ers at Packers on Saturday, and then on Sunday we got the Rams at the Bucs and the Bills at the Chiefs. Let's talk about each team individually, the path to this point, analyze the matchup from an X's and O's and the Jimmy's and Joe's perspective, and then make some picks, including a few betting nuggets maybe. Of course, if you're interested in my final betting picks, additional content, and just some of my general opinions, check out the links in my bio to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and or Facebook, where you can always hit me up and I'll try to get back to you. But now let's get into these games, starting with the 1 vs 4 matchup in the AFC, where we have the Cincinnati Bengals at the Tennessee Titans, home team favored by 3.5, over under set at 47 points. When people look at these 4 games, this may be the one that doesn't have everybody on the edge of their seat, because a lot of people are still scratching their heads as to how Tennessee earned that first round bye, and I'm not sure if everybody's caught up with what the Bengals have done this year, even though they beat the Chiefs 3 weeks ago and just won their first playoff game in over 30 years. The score last week against the Raiders I thought ended up looking tighter than it actually was, considering how Cincinnati dominated the first half before taking the foot off the pedal to some degree. While the Titans haven't seen a ton of quality competition recently, but they beat both teams in the other AFC matchup and seem to be back at full strength on offense with the return of Derrick Henry. Cincinnati's offense has gone from 12 personnel and Joe Mixon carrying the ball 20 plus times per game early in the season to now spreading the receivers out and really going after defenses the last 1.5 months. Joe Burrow has been on a tear recently, throwing for nearly 1,000 yards combined and 4 touchdowns in each of the last 2 regular season games with no interceptions, which he was on pace for again this past Saturday as well, until he decided to churn some clock in the second half. Jamar Chase right now is basically uncoverable, whether you try to challenge him off the line and he can run by you, or you try to stay over the top. Yet he and Burrow just have such a good connection, working those stop routes and back shoulders anyway. Their one issue has been keeping Burrow upright, as they've allowed the 3rd most sacks league-wide, and he's taking some big shots. The defense has shown some issues stopping the run recently, but over the course of the season, they were top 10 in pressures and tackles for loss, so they can create some negative plays, and they've come up with plenty of key stops when needed most, with a defensive line capable of taking over games, although we'll have to see if Trey Hendrickson will be ready to go. Over the last 5 games, they haven't turned the ball over, yet they forced 6 themselves. Titans offense, while all other 7 remaining teams are in the top 10, Tennessee is all the way down at 21st in yards per play with just 5.1, while being tied for 9th with the Chiefs in turnovers at 25, plus they've surrendered the 7th most sacks. However, they did finish top 5 in rushing yards, despite being without King Henry for the second half of the year, and they've now finally started to get into a bit of a groove on offense again, with AJ Brown and Julio both healthy as well. The defense has gotten them here more so, however, I would say, making offenses one-dimensional, with the 2nd most effective run-stopping unit in the league, and then being top 10 in pressures and sacks, as well as being 7th or better in missed tackles, 3rd down, and red zone percentage. Jeffrey Simmons is an absolute monster in the middle. They have guys that can line up in multiple spots up front and run a bunch of games, and then they just keep you guessing on the back end with a lot of disguises and late rotations, where Kevin Byard can be deadly jumping routes. However, they are one of only 2 teams remaining with a negative turnover differential along with San Francisco. So as I look at this matchup, the one distinctive advantage for the Titans comes in the red zone, where they convert for touchdowns on 12.1% more of their drives than their opponents, while the Bengals are barely in plus territory in that regard. Ryan Tannehill's legs could be a big factor, since his 10.5 yards per scramble led all quarterbacks with at least 5 attempts this season, while Burrow led the league in completion percentage and percentage of on-target throws according to Pro Football Reference, while Pro Football Focus had him as the least lucky passer, so to speak, with 1 turnover-worthy play less than his actual interception total. These defenses are 27th and 30th in big plays surrendered through the air, even though both have been great at avoiding those kind of results on the ground, in particular the Titans, that just allowed a league low 3 such carries. However, only the dreadful Giants offense was able to produce less big plays through the air than Tennessee, even with some of the injuries that they've had, and the Bengals have given up an NFL low 37.5 yards of penalties per game. So in a contest where the opportunity for game-breaking plays is right there, I feel the side that has actually been able to cash in on those and hasn't given up any cheap yardage. So give me Evan McPherson on another game-winning field goal late. Bengals 27, Titans 24. And I think the total is set a little bit low. Maybe we'll see how this goes throughout the week. That might be something that I'll get involved in from a betting perspective. But let's just move on to the second matchup here, switching over to the NFC side, where with the San Francisco 49ers at the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay 3 up by 6, total set at 47.5. What a game it was between the Niners and the Cowboys. Kyle Shanahan was on fire early on calling plays, and I thought he controlled the game throughout, until Jimmy G threw that horrible pick after missing a wide open Brandon Ayuk on a beautiful post corner route earlier, which allowed Dallas to get back into it. And let me just quickly address the Cowboys here. You were outplayed and outcoached. None of those flags were egregious, you were just sloppy. And at the end of the game, you played with fire, and then you were arrogant enough to think you could spot the ball before standing in the ref's way. Then you act like you did nothing wrong and encourage the fans to throw stuff at the refs. You should be ashamed of yourselves, and you deserve to stay home. Enough of my little rant here. As for the Packers, I projected them to go all the way, because they were clearly the most consistently great all-around team, wrapping up the NFC's number 1 seed before Week 18, losing just one game with Aaron Rodgers in the lineup, and that was on a field goal since the season opener up to that point. However, they'll face a tough challenge here against the Red Hot Niners team that's given them major playoff trouble in the past, and this is our first of 3 rematches from the regular season, as Green Bay won on a walk-off field goal after the Niners went up with less than a minute and no time was left for the visitors, but Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams crushed their dreams. It may be surprising to some people, but San Francisco actually finished the regular season tied with the Bucs for first in yards per play offensively at 6.1, and despite having the worst quarterback remaining in this tournament, they averaged 0.4 yards more per dropback than any other team in the league, largely thanks to an NFL best 6.5 yards after the catch on average. The run game, statistically speaking, is not quite up in the top tier, but I would argue nobody can attack defensive rules and put together drives so heavily dependent on the run game and have continued success than Shanahan and San Francisco, and they were number 1 in red zone percentage at exactly 2/3. On defense, the big question mark will be the health of All-Pro linebacker Fred Warner, who we saw come down all day on his ankle, and I'm guessing now that the adrenaline from game action has worn off, it'll actually only feel worse. And Nick Bosa, of course, who left the field with a head or neck injury. The other area of concern is on the perimeter, where they do protect those corners with a lot of too-high shells, but when teams manage to isolate those guys, they can be vulnerable on some big plays. The major plus for them is the incredible depth that they've built up on the defensive line, where guys seemingly are coming out of nowhere and giving them quality snaps, after it was more of a one-man show early in the season with Bosa. Unfortunately, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, they have the worst turnover differential among playoff teams at -4, with the lowest amount of takeaways among those, and by eliminating the Cowboys, along with the Raiders losing, they are now the most penalized team remaining. What kind of confused me the most when going through the offensive numbers for the Packers was that they didn't stand out in any particular statistic, especially the 19th ranked red zone offense has been underwhelming, yet having the MVP of the league in Aaron Rodgers, one of the top 2 receivers in the NFL, who centered the passing game around Davante Adams, and a Thunder and Lightning duo out of the backfield, with Matt LaFleur calling a very balanced game, with Rodgers in particular. If you give him too high looks, he's gonna hand that ball off. I think the offense is hard to get off the field, even if they may not be a big play machine. The defense has done a lot of great stuff this season under Joe Barry, with several young and older guys taking the game to another level in the absence of Za'Darius Smith and Jair Alexander, who are both expected to return this weekend, and they've missed the second fewest tackles in the NFL. I love those 2 safeties with that attacking mindset, and if they put the 2 Smiths along for Rashan Gary on the field of passing downs, they can create a lot of issues, lining them up in different spots, and just wreaking havoc. For the season, they're tied for the fewest giveaways, and they can take it away themselves, which is why they are 3rd overall in turnover differential. There's a lot of momentum right now for the Niners, and they're starting to feel like a team that can really beat anybody. The big weakness for the Packers has been slowing down some of the better rushing attacks, such as the Bears, Ravens, and Vikings over a 3-game span, combining for just under 500 yards on the ground. And they ended the year as the only team allowing opponents to pick up first downs on more than 30% of the rushing attempts against them. So between the 20s, with how we've seen Shanahan be able to gash teams with chunk plays off that run game, and then in the red zone, you have the most effective offense against the 3rd worst defense league-wide. As we flip things around, San Francisco is 3rd best at limiting first downs on the ground on a per-round basis, and as long as Warner is out there to pursue towards the edges on zone runs, I think we'll see the Packers have to rely more on Rodgers, which of course he's capable of in tremendous fashion. But if the Niners can squeeze some of those dropback patterns like they did against Dallas and have Rodgers throw the ball into the ground a few times to avoid turnovers, they could get themselves into some 3rd and longs, which right now they seem impossible to pick up against this gold rush. So I really want to pick the Niners here because I can feel that energy with them, but one thing that keeps me from doing it is just simply Jimmy Garoppolo. You just know at some point he will miss a big throw and they'll give it to the other team in the most inopportune time, and Rodgers usually simply doesn't make such a mistake. Along with that, if they do have to go man, I have no idea who can possibly match up against Devontae. I think this is a very balanced matchup, even if it's 1 versus 6 seed. There's a path for San Francisco here, absolutely, but I can't quite pull the trigger. I've got to go Green Bay here, 28-23. Once again, I know both these defenses are good, but I expected the total to be a little bit higher. Another one where there may be some potential here. But from a line perspective, if anything, if you really like the Niners, I would go money line maybe. So now let's move on to Sunday, where we have the LA Rams at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers first. Bucks favored by 3, over under set at 48.5 points. I believe what we have in this matchup are 2 squads that look like they might go all the way and at times poised to meet again in the NFC title game. We get to see the run earlier here because both had some mid-season hiccups and been plagued by injuries down the stretch. But they reminded us what they're capable of in the Wildcard Round. The final scores may not quite look as drastic, but just consider that the Rams were up 28-0 on Arizona after the first drive of the second half, and the Bucks entered the 4th quarter against Philly up 31-0. These teams already met all the way back in Week 3 when LA won quite comfortably 34-24 at SoFi Stadium as Matt Stafford played a nearly flawless game and the Bucks defense simply couldn't get off the field in crucial situations. However, a lot has changed since then, and this time we go to Raymond James, thanks to the Rams losing a Week 18 overtime thriller against the 49ers that we just talked about. For the Rams here first, they were just 0.1 yards off the NFL's high mark in yards per play offensively, and all the 49ers have averaged more net yards per dropback. Matt Stafford was top 3 in big plays and touchdowns through the air, but unfortunately he also was tied for the lead league with 17 interceptions with Trevor Lawrence. Cooper Kupp is the guy in the conversation for the top wide receiver in football along with Davante Adams, and those guys around him have really stepped up, with OBJ still having that game-breaking ability and some other ancillary pieces. They haven't gotten a ton from the run game overall throughout the season, as only the Falcons had less than the 3 runs of 20 plus yards, but with Sony Michel giving them more of a physical presence, and now Cam Akers really showing some signs in his return, just over half a year removed from a torn Achilles, which still is incredible. I still don't quite get it how he did it. And now with that, they really have something going. The defense probably just had the best game of the season against Arizona, holding Cal and company to just 183 total yards in 54 plays. They're banged up at safety, which is big for them, considering all the checks those guys have to make in that defense. But the run D has really stiffened up. They finished the year 3rd with 50 sacks, and now they forced a turnover in each of the last 8 games, which is 13 overall over that stretch. They haven't been great on 3rd downs, 21st in the league actually, but the shots are really starting to show out. Also, only Cincinnati was penalized for fewer yardage this season. As I mentioned already earlier, the Bucks offense finished the regular season tied with San Francisco for first in yards per play at 6.1. Tom Brady led the league in intended and completed yards, as well as his 76 completions of 20 plus yards. And while they are now without 2 of the top 3 receivers heading into the year, which they were for most of the season actually when you look at it, the offensive line has been intact throughout, and Brady has been pressured on just 11% of his dropbacks. That's about a third less than the next closest quarterback, the second most efficient at converting 3rd downs, and just behind the Niners in red zone percentage. The defense has really come along recently and moved on from all the injuries in the secondary, along with Jason Pierre-Paul and Devontae David. They finished 2021 behind only the Bills in pressure percentage and tied for 5th with 29 turnovers forced. The run D has been vulnerable to a few big gains, but they still finished 3rd in total yards on the ground and just held the number 1 rushing offense in the Eagles to under 100 yards for the first time since week 5. So with how good both these teams have been at stopping the run for the most part, I think we'll get to see both quarterbacks sling it around quite a bit on Sunday. What stood out for them first matchup is how much quicker the Rams were on defense and how they created issues with stunts. It really is size versus quicks in a lot of aspects, even though those Tampa linebackers can obviously really run as well. And then we could see a lot of yards after the catch, considering these teams are 24th and 25th respectively in missed tackles on the year. There should be a lot of Jalen Ramsey versus Mike Evans, which I would call a wash, but I'm interested to see if the Bucks put Big Mike more in the slot again, and will Ramsey shadow him wherever he goes, which he has been playing inside quite a bit this season himself. And that will put a lot of pressure on the Bucs' young receivers like Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller and others. For the Rams, not having safety Jordan Fuller to match up against Gronk to some degree, even if it's just attacking from depth on the hashes and contesting catches, could be big. And we could actually see some Eric Weddle versus Gronk here, which we'll see right away if Weddle is still in shape. Trying to come to a conclusion here, in theory I would say which quarterback do I trust more, and that would be Brady, just because he's been in these moments so much more often, and Stafford has been prone to making unadvised decisions recently. But in crisis, with both pass rush groups getting home, and Brady starting to flinch, as Aaron Donald might beat Aaron Stinney off the snap, or if Tristan Wirfs isn't 100% and Von Miller beats him around the corner, I want the maniac in Stafford, who won't mind putting his body at risk. I think this is a really close one, but I like the Rams here 26-24. So obviously, if it goes to 3.5 maybe, or you just want to roll with the money line here, I like the Rams. And finally, we get what feels like a matchup for the ages, as we have the Buffalo Bills at the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs here up by 2.5, total set at 55 points. In a weird way, these seem to be the most inconsistently great teams throughout the regular season that we've seen in a bit, but you know both have the potential to win it all. Buffalo looked like a juggernaut early on, but then alternated between wins and losses for 7 straight weeks, losing at Jacksonville and getting steamrolled by the Colts along the way, before winning the Final Four and then playing on paper the greatest offensive performance of any game in NFL history, considering they were first to ever only score or take a knee on every single possession, and that came against the Bill Belichick coach defense. Kansas City, on the other hand, had the ups and downs as well, starting the year 3-4 before going on one of the least impressive 8-game winning streaks that I've ever seen, barely squeaking by mediocre opponents, outside of destroying the Raiders a couple of times, and then the Steelers, who they manhandled for the second quarter on this past Sunday night as well. We saw them lose at Cincinnati in Week 17 and just get out of Denver to secure that number 2 seed, but we've also seen those moments of absolute dominance on both sides of the ball, and Patrick Mahomes is back to making magic happen. Once again, this is a rematch from earlier in the year, Week 5 to be more precise, which Buffalo really dominated and won 30-20. And this is the first time we've seen two quarterbacks in the postseason face each other, coming off 5 touchdown performances respectively. The Bills' offense has looked completely one-dimensional for large stretches of the season, and we've criticized Brian Daboll at times, but they did end up 6th in total and average yards per rush, even though I understand Josh Allen was a huge part in that. We've seen them commit to taking advantage of soft box counts more so, and only the Colts had more than the 18 runs of 20+ yards. The offense had been too Allen reliant up to that point, but right now you can argue he's making more big time plays than any other quarterback in the league, and he puts so much stress on the defense because he can pick apart some coverage, and then if you try to go man, he will buy some extra time and deliver perfect balls to his guys in crossing routes. Plus, of course, he can just take off and run over linebacker as well, so he's really a freak of nature. And as much as there was about that offense, they ultimately finished the regular season 3rd in points scored and 3rd on percentage. Defensively, they ended the regular season number 1 across almost all the major statistics, such as yards, points, yards per play, points per drive, 3rd down percentage and pressure percentage, as well as being tied for 3rd with 30 total takeaways. They feasted on the weak to some degree, and we've seen them have some issues stopping the Bucs' passing attack, as well as getting run over by New England. The Trey White injury could become an issue against the Chiefs, but they can rotate bodies up front, and those 2 safeties on the back end are playing at a phenomenal level. Kansas City, as much as we've questioned the offense throughout the year, they ultimately were number 1 in first downs total, 3rd and 4th down percentage, and points per drive. Patrick Mahomes has been playing under much better control, and he's been gashing teams when leaving wide open space in front of him to run up into, as well as when he's trying to create that magic off script. It's more within the structure, I would say, where it coincides with the routes that are being run. And then they have quietly averaged 123.5 rushing yards and failed to reach the century mark just once over the past 6 weeks. As far as the defense goes, only the Ravens allowed a higher yards per play average at 5.9, and they're also 31st against the run on average. But other than the matchup against the Bengals, they've been outstanding on that side of the ball since the start of November basically, ending the regular season 6th in pressure percentage and tied for 5th with 29 takeaways. The cover guys will get in your face and disrupt you off the line. They have very instinctual safeties, and Chris Jones has been borderline unblockable since he's been back on the interior more so. As we look at how these two groups match up against each other, I'll be interested in how they want to come out. This feels like such a heavyweight fight, where they might want to feel each other out a little bit at first, and we don't know who will land that first punch. I think if the Chiefs stick with their approach of heavy press man on the outside, Buffalo will be ready to call Steve Spagnuolo's bluff and trust the receivers to separate. The issue is that I don't know if those guys not named Stephon Diggs can do that consistently. On the other hand, Buffalo will be fine with playing off zone much more so, and force Mahomes to be very patient, checking it down, letting his playmakers do the work. A big factor in that will be the play of those two athletic linebackers in the middle and the pursuit out wide, if Kansas City can find those voids in their zone patterns. I expect double-digit targets for Travis Kelce, just because this feels like such a game where Mahomes might be buying a little bit of extra time and Kelce finds his open spots. And if they can get the safety to shade away from it, take a shot down the field against second-year cornerback Dane Jackson. Both quarterbacks like to drift deep into the pocket to let the play develop for that split second longer, so those edge rushers have to take wider angles to contain them, but then they're both capable of taking off as well if a lane opens up for them. Also, the top two running backs in this matchup right now seem to be Devin Singletary and Jared McKinnon, who might have some key one-on-one matchups in space and checkdowns. There are so many factors that come into play. We got great quarterbacks, some great coaches. I hope this game lives up to what I believe it is. I know I've said this a lot, but this is the toughest one to call for me yet. So I'll just go with the home team here, which may be more likely to take a risk at some point, and that way I also stick with my playoff bracket, which I hope remains perfect. Chiefs win on a missed field goal attempt. I'm sorry, Buffalo, 28-25. So really nothing that is attractive to me from a betting perspective, other than maybe looking at receptions for Travis Kelce. I already explained that a little bit. And that's going to wrap things up for the divisional round. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a couple of friends to get them ready for these games. I will of course be back next week, probably recapping these games a little bit, and then previewing the conference championships. Once again, if you're interested in more of my work, my social media outlets are on the screen right now, as well as in the video description. Plus you can head over to my page hellosforfootballtalk.com, where I'll probably put up my Super Bowl preview to be able to get more into detail and insert some video clips with less fear of having copyright issues. So until then, see you later. Peace!